Picture the most peaceful, boring Saturday of your life. You're buying a toy train for your nephew. The sun is shining through the mall skylights. You're fine. You're safe. You're 2 years removed from the most terrifying, passionate love of your life. And then, a little boy crashes into your legs. You look up to help him, and your world stops. Striding toward you is her. Ava. Your ex-wife. The most dangerous woman in the city. The heir to an empire built on shadows. And the little boy, he has her eyes. But he has your nose. The math is instant and brutal. Your son. The security team closes in, not to protect her, but to contain you. And as she looks at you, the man who called her a monster and ran, you don't see heartbreak. You see the cold, calculating fury of a queen whose kingdom you just accidentally walked back into. This is not a story about winning her back. It's about surviving long enough to prove you deserve to know the boy she raised alone. It's about learning that the cage you feared was the only place you ever belonged. The Oak Ridge Galleria on a Saturday morning was a cathedral of curated contentment. Sunlight, manufactured to feel like afternoon in the Hamptons, poured through vast skylights, gleaming off polished marble floors. The air was a warm, comforting soup of smells: cinnamon pretzels, gourmet popcorn, the cloying sweetness of perfume samples sprayed by eager attendants. Leo moved through it like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. He understood the rituals, the exchange of currency for goods, the performance of leisure, but he no longer felt he belonged to the species. This was the land of the ordinary, and he was a tourist on a permanent visa, his passport stamped with a loneliness he wore like a tailored coat. It was fine. It was his choice. This clean, safe, predictable expanse was what he'd fought for, bled for, destroyed his marriage for. He repeated it like a mantra with every step: this is peace. This is safety. His destination was the Wooden Knight, a toy store that looked like a page from a Scandinavian design catalogue. It was all light wood, soft lighting, and quiet classical music. He was here for his nephew's 5th birthday. The request was specific: something cool, but not plastic. Inside, Leo was immediately paralyzed. The silence was oppressive, the choices overwhelming. A wall of puzzles, shelves of intricate building sets, a forest of hand-painted dolls. He drifted past a display of trains. Not the bright, clacking electric sets of his childhood, but minimalist, beautifully crafted wooden engines and carriages made of beechwood and finished with non-toxic oils. His hand reached out, hovering over a sleek, red engine. A memory, sharp as a splinter, lanced through his careful calm. Her voice, husky with sleep, murmuring into the dark of their bedroom. When we have kids, no plastic crap. I want them to have wooden things. Things that last. Things you can feel the grain of, you know. He'd kissed her shoulder, breathing in her scent. Wooden trains it is. I'll build the tracks myself. The ache was instant and physical, a hollowing out beneath his ribs. He hadn't thought of that in years. He had deliberately not thought of it. He pulled his hand back as if the wood were hot. His eyes stung. With a jerky motion, he grabbed the red engine and a box of curved tracks, carrying them to the counter like a shield. The transaction was swift, the paper bag pristine. He was buying a ghost. A future that had died on the vine. He left the store, the bag swinging from his hand, a $70 apology to a phantom. Needing to ground himself, he found a seat at the food court's periphery, away from the bustling families at the center. He set the bag down and unwrapped his single, overpriced coffee. This was part of the ritual, too. The observation. He watched a young father patiently help his daughter, who must have been about 3, squeeze ketchup onto her fries. The little girl's face was a masterpiece of concentration, her tiny tongue poking out. The father laughed, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy, and wiped a smear of ketchup from her chin with his thumb. Leo looked away, the pang of longing so violent it felt like nausea. He stared into his black coffee, waiting for the wave to pass. That's not your life, he told himself firmly. You chose a different path. A clean path. A quiet path. He didn't allow himself to finish the thought. A lonely path. He was so focused on regaining his equilibrium that he didn't see the small blur of motion until it was too late. A peal of laughter, high and bright as a bell, cut through the food court din. A little boy, a streak of dark hair and a blue dinosaur sweater, was running full tilt, his little sneakers slapping the marble. He was giggling uncontrollably, looking over his shoulder at a flustered, kind-faced woman in her 50s. Rosa, the nanny, who was calling after him, "Luca. Piano, piccolo. Slow down." Leo had half a second to register the collision course. He started to shift his coffee, but it was futile. The boy, Luca, barreled into his legs with the unthinking force of a miniature comet. Oof! The air left Leo's lungs. Hot coffee sloshed over his hand and onto the floor. The boy stumbled back, blinking, his laughter dying into surprise. Instinct took over. Leo was on his knees immediately, not caring about the coffee stain seeping into the knee of his chinos. "Whoa there, speed racer," he said, his voice automatically gentling into the tone he used with his nephew. "You gotta watch where you're going. You okay?" He checked the boy for any sign of hurt, his architect's hands, practical, careful, brushing the boy's sleeves. The boy just stared at him with huge, dark eyes. Eyes that were familiar in a way that made Leo's brain itch. "Luca. Dio mio, I'm so sorry." Rosa arrived, breathless, her hands fluttering. She reached for the boy, but her attention was already pulled away, her face paling as she looked past Leo. The air changed. It wasn't a metaphor. The very atmosphere in the food court seemed to thicken, to cool by a degree. The chatter didn't stop, but it muted, as if someone had turned down a dial. Leo felt it on the back of his neck, the primal, animal awareness of a predator entering the clearing. He looked up from the boy, following Rosa's terrified gaze. Time didn't just slow, it shattered. She stood 10 feet away, having just emerged from the archway of a boutique that sold cashmere sweaters for the price of a car payment. Ava. But it was an Ava he didn't recognize, or rather, an Ava who had evolved into her final, formidable form. She wore sleek, dark athleisure that clung to her like a second skin, expensive and understated. Her hair, once wild and long, was pulled back in a severe, perfect ponytail that sharpened the elegant lines of her cheekbones and jaw. She was scanning the crowd, her eyes, those unforgettable, deep-set eyes, narrowed with a mother's frantic search. They swept past Rosa, past the spilled coffee, and landed on him. On Leo. A lifetime played out in the space between two heartbeats on her face. First, shock. A pure, unguarded jolt that widened her eyes and parted her lips. It was the Ava from the beach photo, the one he'd kept in a box. Then, recognition. A hardening, a focusing. She saw him star. Leonard Collins. Her ex-husband. Then, something that stole the breath from Leo's lungs, a flash of raw, unguarded hurt. A wince so profound it seemed to physically pain her, a ghost of the woman he'd broken appearing and vanishing in an instant. Finally, with a speed that was terrifying, came the mask. Her expression smoothed into something polished, impenetrable, and colder than the marble floor. It was the look of a queen finding a cockroach on her throne. Contempt, refined and absolute. Behind her, a mountain of a man in a tailored suit, Marco, took a subtle step forward, his presence shifting from companion to sentinel. Leo was still on his knees, one hand on the boy's, on Luca's arm. He tried to speak. His mouth was Sahara dry. "Ava." She didn't move. She simply looked him up and down, a CEO assessing a failed, mediocre investment. The silence stretched, taut enough to snap. When she spoke, her voice was low, cultured, and carried the chill of a winter wind. "Leonard." The use of his full name was a deliberate slap. A reminder of distance, of formality, of revoked intimacy. She let the word hang, then her lips curled, just at one corner. How pedestrian. The insult was so perfectly aimed it was almost beautiful. It didn't just criticize, it categorized him. He was beneath her, part of the bland, common scenery of the mall she momentarily inhabited. It was Luca who broke the dreadful tableau. He tugged on Ava's hand, his small voice piping up with innocent, devastating clarity. "Mama, is that the man from the picture by your bed? The one who makes you sad?" The air was sucked out of the universe. Leo's eyes snapped from Ava's frozen face to the boy. The picture by your bed. He looked at Luca properly for the first time. The dark, serious eyes. The shape of his brow. But the nose, that was his nose. The subtle, stubborn set of the jaw, his. The math was brutal, instantaneous, and left him gutted. 4 years old. Ava's mask didn't just fracture, it imploded. For less than a second, pure, undiluted panic flooded her features. She looked from her son's curious face to Leo's dawning horror, and in that micro-expression, Leo saw the truth of the last 4 years. The secret carried, the explanations concocted, the constant, hidden fear of this exact moment. Then, the boss was back. The vulnerability was sealed away behind walls of titanium. Her voice, when it came, was flat, absolute, brooking no argument. It was a voice that gave orders to men who handled guns. "Rosa. Take Luca to the car. Now." "Sai, signora." Rosa swooped in, scooping Luca up, who began to whimper in confusion, his eyes still locked on Leo. Ava's gaze never left Leo. "Marco." The mountain moved. In 2 strides, Marco was beside Leo, not touching him yet, but his presence was a physical barrier between Leo and the exit, between Leo and the rest of the world. He was calm, professional, and utterly immovable. "You," Ava said, the single word a command that vibrated with restrained fury. "Upstairs. Now." Leo found his feet, coffee forgotten, the toy bag abandoned on the chair. He was in shock, his mind a white noise of conflicting sirens. "My son. A son. She kept him. She has a picture of me. She's terrified I'm here. Marco's hand closed firmly, not roughly, but with definitive authority, around his upper arm. It was a guide, but it was also a custody. He was being escorted. As Marco steered him towards a discreet, brushed steel elevator door marked private, Leo twisted to look back one more time. Ava was crouched in front of Luca, who was now crying softly into Rosa's shoulder. She was fixing the collar of his little jacket, her movements swift and sure. She whispered something in his ear, and the boy nodded, his sobs hitching. The love on her face as she looked at her son was so deep, so fierce, so devastatingly beautiful that it made Leo's heart stop. It was a love that would burn cities and move mountains. It was a love he had once, foolishly, believed could be directed at him. Then she stood. She smoothed her ponytail, a gesture of reclaiming control. And as her eyes found Leo's across the crowded food court, just before the elevator doors began to close, that love was gone. Replaced by something that promised ice and iron and retribution. It was the look of a woman who had just seen a ghost from a war she thought she'd won, and who was already calculating how to bury it for good. The doors slid shut with a soft, final shush star. The polished steel reflected Leo's pale, stunned face back at him. The elevator began to ascend. He was sealed in. The carefully constructed world of his last 2 years, the peace, the safety, the quiet, was gone, shattered into a million irreparable pieces on the sunlit floor of the Galleria. And he was rising, helpless, into the gilded cage of his past. The private elevator didn't have buttons. It simply ascended, a smooth, silent ascent that felt like being drawn up into the belly of a silent, luxurious beast. The mirrored walls offered Leo a dozen reflections of his own shock, his hair slightly disheveled, a coffee stain on his knee, his eyes wide with a terror that was old and new all at once. Marco stood beside him, a statue in a tailored suit, his gaze fixed on the door, his presence a wall of polite, professional inevitability. There was no point in speaking. No plea would matter here. This was her world, and he was being processed. The doors opened not onto a hallway, but directly into a room that stole what little breath Leo had left. The VIP lounge of Valmont's, the Galleria's crown jewel department store. It was a study in hushed, intimidating wealth. Thick, cream-colored carpets swallowed all sound. The walls were lined with dark silk. Low-slung, Modern furniture in shades of charcoal and bronze looked more like sculpture than places to sit. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a panoramic, dizzying view of the city skyline, turning the bustling mall below into a silent, ant-like diorama. The air smelled of lemon verbena and old money. Two attendants in pristine uniform stood motionless near a discreet bar, their expressions blank, trained to be invisible. This wasn't a lounge, it was a throne room. And it was her temporary office. Ava stood at the window, her back to the elevator, a silhouette cut from darkness against the bright city. She didn't turn. She was on the phone, her voice low, clipped, and utterly in command. "No, that shipment does not move until I see the verified paperwork from the customs broker. Tell him his word is worth less than the air he's wasting. Fix it." She ended the call without a goodbye, slipping the phone into her pocket. The silence that followed was heavier, charged. She still didn't turn. "Marco." The door. A soft click as Marco secured the elevator behind them, then took up a post beside it, arms crossed. A human lock. Leo stood awkwardly in the center of the vast carpet, feeling like a specimen under a glass bell jar. He wasn't offered a seat. This was a power play, and he was meant to feel unbalanced, exposed. Finally, she turned. She moved away from the window slowly, her eyes raking over him from a distance, taking in every detail, the slight wear on the cuffs of his well-made but off-the-rack jacket, the quiet stress in his posture, the utter foreignness of him in this space. A faint, cruel smile touched her lips. "You look tired, Leo." Her voice was conversational, a knife wrapped in velvet. "The architect's life not as fulfilling as you dreamed. All those straight lines and empty models. Does it keep you warm at night?" The attack was so precise it winded him. She knew his career. Of course she did. She'd always known everything. The realization that she'd kept tabs, that he'd been a file on her desk, a blip on her radar, was humiliating. He fell back on the script he'd written and rewritten in his mind for 2 years, the justification that had been his armor. His voice came out tighter than he wanted. "Ava, I had to go. You know I had to go. That life, the things I saw, the things I heard. I couldn't breathe. I was living in a gilded cage, waiting for the bullet with my name on it. Every car backfire, every strange face. I was a hostage." He'd expected her anger. He'd expected icy denial. What he got was worse, derisive, pitying contempt. She let out a short, sharp laugh that held no warmth, only the chill of a long-stored bitterness. She took a few steps toward him, her heels silent on the plush carpet. Cage. She repeated the word as if it were in a foreign, foolish language. "Leo, I gave you a palace. The best security, the finest things, complete freedom within the safest perimeter on the East Coast." Her eyes hardened, the amusement vanishing. "And that bullet you were so terrified of? The only threat to you was ever your own paranoia. My father's old rivals. Handled, long before they ever got a whiff of you. Internal disputes. They were settled in warehouses and boardrooms you never saw. Insulated you." She emphasized the word, leaning into it. "I created a fantasy world within my world for you. A sanitized, beautiful bubble where the only blood was in the steaks I had flown in from Japan and the only violence was in the operas we watched. And you," she shook her head, a gesture of profound, weary disappointment. "You called it a prison. You mistook my protection for captivity." The ground shifted under Leo's feet. His carefully constructed narrative, the brave escape from a life of danger, cracked. What if it hadn't been bravery, but a failure of imagination? A failure of trust? The thought was swept away by a more urgent, primal need. His eyes, which had been darting around the opulent room, finally settled on her face, and the question that had been screaming in his head since the food court burst out, his voice ragged. "Is he? Ava, is he mine?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The businesslike contempt evaporated, replaced by something far more raw and dangerous. This was the nerve he'd touched. This was the vault he'd tried to pry open. Her composure didn't break, it transformed. Her posture became rigid, her eyes turning into chips of obsidian. You, she said, the word a low, dangerous growl, lost the right to ask that question the day you walked out. The day you stood in my father's study, my study, and called me a monster in front of men who have killed for showing less disrespect. The memory was alive in the room, a ghost they both could see. Flashback. The study was all dark wood and leather, smelling of cigar smoke and old power. Leo, his suitcase already by the door, was vibrating with a fear that had curdled into rage. Ava, standing behind the massive desk, her face pale but composed. You can't leave like this, Leo. We can fix this. Fix it. Leo's voice was too loud, echoing off the bookshelves. He gestured wildly at the window, at the city she controlled. How? By having one of your goons eliminate my anxiety. This isn't a life, Ava. It's a syndicate. And you want to bring a child into this? What kind of mother would you even be? The words, once spoken, hung in the air, poisonous and irreversible. He saw her flinch as if struck. You'd teach our child to balance a ledger and clean a gun. I won't do it. I can't build a family on a foundation of blood. He turned and left. He didn't see her hand fly to her stomach, a subconscious, protective gesture. He didn't see the single, furious tear she refused to let fall. He didn't know that the nausea she'd been feeling for a week wasn't from stress. He was gone. A week later, a doctor confirmed what her body already knew. Back in the lounge, the ghost of that tear seemed to glitter in her eyes. You said you could never build a family on a foundation of blood, she repeated, her voice trembling now, not with fear, but with a fury so deep it had become part of her bones. So, no. You don't get to know. You don't get to stroll back in and play paternal after you torched the very idea of us having a future. You get to wonder. You get to look at every little boy on the street for the rest of your life and ask yourself. That is your sentence. The cruelty of it was exquisite. It was also, he realized with a sickening lurch, exactly what he deserved. She took a deep, visible breath, pulling the mantle of the boss back around her shoulders. The vulnerable, wounded woman was locked away again. Here is what will happen, she said, her tone returning to that flat, businesslike precision. You will not approach Luca. You will not attempt to contact me through any channel. You will go back to your very small, very safe life and you will live in it. You will be a ghost. If you don't, if you so much as Google his name, I will have Marco relocate you to a place where you can do no harm. A place with no internet, no phones, and a very long view of nothing. Are we clear? It was a threat, delivered with the calm certainty of someone who had carried out such relocations before. But Leo didn't hear the threat anymore. He heard the music underneath it, the symphony of pain. He was finally listening. He was finally seeing her. Not Ava Moretti, the formidable heir. Not the Mafia boss who could have him disappeared. But the woman who had loved him fiercely, protectively, and whose love he had thrown back in her face with the most devastating accusation he could conceive. The rehearsed speeches, the justifications, the fear, it all crumbled to dust. He felt hollowed out, ashamed in a way he'd never experienced. His own pathetic self-preservation was laid bare, not as courage, but as a profound cowardice. He didn't plead for access. He didn't argue his case. He just looked at her, his gaze steady for the first time since he'd entered the room. You loved me, he said, the words quiet, simple, a statement of fact that hung in the perfumed air. And I used that love as a weapon to hurt you. That's the real reason I left, isn't it? He took a half step forward, and Marco shifted minutely, a warning. Leo ignored him, his eyes locked on Ava's. I wasn't strong enough. I was too weak to be loved by someone as strong as you. I was afraid of your world, yes, but mostly, I was afraid I'd disappear in it. That I'd never be enough for you. So I left before you could realize it, too. I called it a prison so I could feel brave for escaping. His honesty was a grenade with the pin pulled. It lay between them, ticking. Ava flinched. A full-body recoil she couldn't suppress. Her carefully constructed mask, already strained, slipped. The raw hurt from the food court flashed in her eyes again, mixed now with a bewildered fury at his insight. He had named the demon, and in doing so, had disarmed her. She couldn't punish him for a truth he was now offering freely. She turned her back on him abruptly, a queen dismissing a petitioner, and strode back to the window, her shoulders rigid. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper he almost didn't catch, thick with an emotion she could no longer fully contain. "Get him out of my sight." "Signora?" Marco asked, confirming the order. "Now, Marco." Marco's hand was on Leo's arm again, firmer this time, turning him toward the elevator. Leo didn't resist. He let himself be guided, his mind reeling. But as Marco reached for the call button, Leo looked back one last time. Ava was still at the window, a stark, lonely figure against the sprawling city. She wasn't looking at the view. Her head was bowed slightly. And in the dark, reflective glass of the window, perfectly clear from where Leo stood, he saw it. A single, silver tear had escaped her furious control. It traced a slow, deliberate path down the flawless plane of her reflected cheek, a crack in the fortress wall, a silent admission of a wound that had never healed. Then the elevator doors opened, Marco guided him in, and the doors closed, cutting off the view. The descent began. He was being ejected from her world once more. But this time, he carried something out with him. Not just the shattering knowledge of a son, but the devastating, irrevocable understanding of what his fear had truly cost. And the image, seared into his mind, of that one, lonely tear. It was a vulnerability she would never have shown him on purpose. It was a truth more powerful than any threat. She wasn't just angry. She was still hurt. And that changed everything. The silence of his apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. The clean lines and neutral colors he'd curated for his peace of mind were a mocking backdrop to the chaos unfolding inside him. Leo didn't sleep. He moved through the rooms like a man possessed, the neatness of his former life giving way to a frantic, intellectual disarray. The dining table, previously used for solitary meals and the occasional spreadsheet, was transformed into a war room. A large city map was taped down, its surface covered in a constellation of red circles and cryptic notes in his precise architect's handwriting. He wasn't plotting an attack, he was trying to understand the geography of a kingdom he'd fled. The circles marked properties, a shipping warehouse in the old port district, a sleek midtown office tower, a chain of upscale dry cleaners, a holding company that owned several parking garages. These were her legitimate fronts, the visible tip of the iceberg he'd once been so afraid of drowning under. Using public records, business registries, and his own knowledge of city planning and architectural permits, he began to trace the connections. It was a monstrous, intricate puzzle. And he began to see it. Not just a criminal enterprise, but an empire. A vast, interlocking network of businesses that laundered money, sure, but also generated it legitimately. The dry cleaners were in prime locations and always busy. The parking garages utilized a proprietary, efficient software system he recognized as being ahead of its time. The office tower was fully leased to reputable tech firms. This wasn't the brutish, thuggish operation of her father's generation that he'd feared. This was corporate. This was smart. This was her star. Ava had taken a legacy of fear and built a fortress of commerce and influence. The realization was a blow to his solar plexus. He hadn't been trapped in a den of monsters. He'd been offered a seat at the right hand of a visionary, and he'd called it a cage. But the map, the research, it was all just noise to quiet the screaming in his heart. He would stop for hours, staring at a single point on his laptop screen. He'd used his skills to find what he shouldn't, a blurred, distant paparazzi photo from a charity event over a year ago. Ava, in a stunning gown, was looking down, smiling softly at a little boy in a miniature tuxedo holding her hand. Luca. He zoomed in until the pixels blurred, tracing the slope of the boy's nose. His nose, the one his sister always said was too pronounced. He'd study the boy's eyes, the shape of his ears, the way he held his mother's hand with a solemn trust. A physical ache would bloom in his chest, so profound he'd have to stand up and pace, running his hands through his hair until it stood on end. This was how his sister, Mia, found him 3 days later. She let herself in with her key and froze in the doorway, her eyes wide with alarm. The Leo she knew was fastidious, ordered. This man was a wild-eyed stranger surrounded by maps and empty coffee cups, a photo of a child glowing on his laptop screen. Leo. Oh my God. What is all this? He didn't look up from the screen. Her dry cleaning chain uses an eco-friendly chemical process she patented. Did you know that? It's more expensive, but it's a selling point in the neighborhood she targets. Mia strode over and slammed the laptop shut. Look at me. He finally did, and the haunted desperation in his eyes scared her. Leo, you have to stop this. This isn't healthy. You're chasing a ghost straight into a fire. He has my nose, Mia, Leo said, his voice hollow. I don't care if he has your entire face plastered on his forehead, she snapped, her voice cracking with fear for him. You need to let this go. That woman in the mall? That wasn't the Ava you married. That wasn't the heartbroken girl you left. That was Ava Moretti Star. The head of the family. Do you understand the difference? She could blink and you'd vanish. She told you to walk away. For the love of God, listen to her. Leo stood up, his movements slow, weighed down by a terrible clarity. He looked at the maps, at the closed laptop, then back at his sister. Don't you see, Mia? That's what I finally understand. I never left the broken-hearted girl. He walked to the window, looking out at the safe, boring street below. I created her. I took the woman who loved me and I broke her heart so completely that the only thing left that could fit in the space was Ava Moretti. The boss. I did that. He turned, his eyes blazing with a painful new conviction. And now I have to find out if the man I am now, whoever the hell that is brave enough to even look that woman in the eye and apologize. Not for leaving. For what I turned her into when I did. Mia saw it then. The old Leo, the one ruled by fear, was gone. This was something else, something determined and doomed and frighteningly resolute. She hugged him, tight, as if she could imprint her own safety onto him. Just be careful, she whispered, crying softly into his shoulder. Please. The direct approach was suicide. He knew that. Contacting her, showing up at her door, would be seen as a threat, an act of aggression. He had to be smarter. He had to speak a language she might, just might, still understand. His research gave him the idea. Buried in the financials of one of her charitable foundations was a recurring grant to the Riverbend Community Center, in a struggling but resilient neighborhood on the city's east side. It wasn't a flashy donation. It was consistent, practical. He drove there. The building was a tired, brick structure from the 50s, but it was clean and bustling with life. He met with the director, a weary but warm woman named Gloria. He didn't mention Ava. He presented his architect's license, his portfolio, and offered his services pro bono to redesign their crumbling children's library and create plans for a much-needed expansion. He was just a professional wanting to give back. Gloria, with tears in her eyes, accepted. For weeks, it was his sanctuary. He traded the sterile silence of his apartment for the noisy, vibrant chaos of the center. He measured walls stained with old posters, sketched amidst the shouts of kids playing basketball in the gym, listened to the needs of the tutors and volunteers. He drafted plans for built-in reading nooks, better lighting, efficient storage. He was using his skills for something real, something good. And he was doing it in a place that mattered to her star. It was a message in a bottle, tossed into the vast ocean of her world. I am not a threat. I am what I always was. I build. He was installing a new bookshelf with a local carpenter when he felt it again, that subtle shift in the atmosphere, a quieting, a collective intake of breath. He looked up. She was there. No entourage. Just Ava, dressed in understated dark jeans and a simple black sweater, her hair down and slightly wind-tousled. She was walking slowly through the main room with Gloria, listening intently, nodding. She looked approachable, human. Then she turned and saw the doorway to the library, where Leo stood frozen, a drill in his hand. Their eyes met across the crowded room. There was no fury this time. No icy contempt. What he saw in her face was something far more devastating, a deep, weary sadness. It was the look of someone gazing at a shipwreck from the shore, remembering the voyage. She held his gaze for a long, painful moment. Then, without a word, she turned back to Gloria, said a few quiet words, and walked out the way she came. She didn't look back. Leo stood there, the drill humming pointlessly in his hand, feeling like he'd been carved out. She hadn't even been angry. She was just sad. And that was worse. The next afternoon, a sealed, cream-colored envelope with no stamp was left on the newly sanded library desk. His name was written on the front in elegant, familiar script. His heart hammered against his ribs as he opened it. Inside was a single, black keycard. A street address was written beneath it. And a time, *8:00 p.m. The address led to the Athenaeum, a private members' club so exclusive it didn't have a sign, just a discreet brass plaque by a reinforced oak door in a converted brownstone. The keycard granted him entry into a world of hushed opulence, dark wood panels, leather armchairs that sighed when you sat in them, the soft clink of crystal and the low murmur of conversations about power and money. It was a neutral zone. A boardroom. She had chosen a place of business, not a home, not a prison. It was a statement. She was waiting at a corner table, half hidden by a wingback chair. A glass of mineral water sat untouched before her. She wasn't standing by a window asserting dominance. She was sitting, waiting. When he approached, she gestured to the chair opposite without looking up from the tablet she was studying. Sit. He sat today. The silence stretched, filled with the club's ambient murmur. You've been persistent, she said finally, setting the tablet aside. Her eyes met his. They were guarded, professional, but the raw sadness from the community center was gone, replaced by a cool assessment. I had to be, he said, his voice low. Not to bother you. To demonstrate. Demonstrate what? That you can read public tax filings? That you're handy with a drill? There was a flicker of her old sharpness, but it was muted. That I'm not a threat to you. Or to him. She studied him, and he felt microscopically examined. After a long moment, she reached into a leather folio beside her and slid a document across the polished table. It was thick, bound in a legal cover. Luca asks about you, she said, her voice utterly flat. The picture man. It's become a complication. Leo's breath hitched. He asks about me. I am a businesswoman, she continued, as if discussing a merger. I deal in assets and liabilities. Controlled access, under my supervision, mitigates the liability of his curiosity becoming a fixation. It is a practical solution. She tapped the document. This outlines the terms. 1 hour. Weekly. Location of my choosing. Supervised by a person of my designation, Marco or Silvio. No physical contact beyond what is necessary for safety. No discussion of our past. No gifts. No attempts at indirect communication outside the allotted time. Strict confidentiality, enforced by a non-disclosure agreement with penalties clearly delineated. She looked at him. These terms are non-negotiable. This is not a discussion. It is an offer. Take it, or walk away now and never come near either of us again. It was the coldest, most clinical proposal imaginable. It treated fatherhood as a risk to be managed, a nuisance to be scheduled. And it was everything he wanted. A chance. A foot in the door. He didn't pick up the document. He didn't scan the clauses about penalties. He took the pen she offered, found the signature line, and scrawled his name. Then he looked up at her. Thank you. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at his immediate, unresisting capitulation. Then it was gone. This is for him, she said, her voice softening infinitesimally. It was the first crack, the first hint of the woman beneath the boss. Not for you. Don't mistake logistical allowance for forgiveness. That door is closed. I understand, he said. And he did. The meeting was clearly over. He stood, the formal silence of the club pressing in on him. He had what he came for. More than he dared hope for. But as he turned to go, the other reason for his obsession, the need to prove he wasn't just a scared civilian, that he could see her world, rose up in him. He paused, looking down at her. She was already gathering her things, dismissing him from her thoughts. "The waterfront development," he said quietly. She stilled. "The mixed-use towers by the old cannery. Your secret, highly leveraged flagship project with the city planners." He saw her spine straighten, her fingers freeze on her folio. She didn't look up, but she was listening with every fiber of her being. "The schematics are brilliant. The way you've integrated the historical facade is masterful. But there's a flaw. A serious one. The load-bearing calculations for the south wing's cantilevered section, they're off. The stress models on page 47 don't account for the revised soil composition report from the geotechnical survey last month. If you build to those specs, you'll get settling. Then cracks. Then, in a high wind event, failure." He let the word hang in the quiet, perfumed air. He wasn't threatening. He was consulting. He was using the only language he had that was equal to hers, the language of building, of creation, of seeing the hidden structures that hold things up, or cause them to fall. Ava slowly lifted her head. Her face was a mask of calm, but her eyes were volcanoes. Not of anger, but of stunned, furious reassessment. He had just exposed a multimillion-dollar, potentially catastrophic error in her most important legitimate venture. He had seen something her own highly paid engineers had missed. He gave a slight, respectful nod. "You should have your people look at page 47. Then he turned and walked out of the Athenaeum, leaving her sitting alone at the table. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel the weight of her gaze on his retreating back, heavy with 1,000 new, dangerous calculations. The moment the oak door closed behind him, Ava remained motionless for a full 30 seconds. Then, with a hand that was not quite steady, she pulled out her phone. She didn't call her head of construction. She didn't call her lawyer. She called Marco. Her voice was low, urgent, stripped of all its earlier coolness. "Marco. Drop everything. Get the full schematics and the geotechnical report for the waterfront project. Run a deep dive on the south wing load calculations. Start with page 47. I want a full analysis and a new engineering team on this by morning. No one outside our circle is to know. *Nessuno. She ended the call and stared at the empty chair where Leo had been sitting. The keycard agreement lay signed on the table. The business proposal was in place. But he had just changed the game. He was no longer just a ghost from her past or a biological donor to be managed. He was a variable. An asset. A man who had just walked into the heart of her empire and pointed out a fatal crack in the foundation. And he had done it not to harm her, but to protect something she had built. The chessboard had just been upended. And for the first time in 2 years, the look in Ava Moretti's eyes wasn't just about damage control. It was about strategy. And a dawning, terrifying curiosity. The location for the first visit was a masterclass in controlled access. It wasn't the penthouse, that sacred, personal fortress. It was a suite of rooms on the 3rd floor of a bland, corporate office building she owned in the financial district. On a Saturday, the place was a ghost town. The playroom was large, clean, and utterly soulless. Beige walls, industrial carpet, a few sturdy, uninspired toys in a bin. A large, unbreakable window looked out onto an air shaft. It was a neutral zone, a diplomatic holding cell. It screamed, "You are here on sufferance." Leo arrived 10 minutes early, clutching the paper bag from the wooden knight. He'd rewrapped it. His palms were sweating. Marco had met him in the sterile lobby and escorted him up in silence. Now, Leo stood in the middle of the empty room, feeling more exposed than he ever had in his life. Silvio, a leaner, more watchful man than Marco, stood sentinel by the door, his arms crossed, his expression giving nothing away. Then the door on the far side of the room opened, and Rosa came in, holding Luca's hand. The boy was wearing a different sweater, this one grey with a rocket ship on it. He stared at Leo with those huge, serious eyes, half hiding behind Rosa's leg. "1 hour, Silvio intoned, his voice flat. "We will be outside." Rosa gave Leo a small, encouraging smile and a little push on Luca's back. "Be good, *Piccolo star." Then she left, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving Leo alone with his son and the silent, observing eye of a camera he knew was mounted somewhere in the ceiling. "Hi, Luca," Leo said, his voice unnaturally high. He crouched down, trying to make himself smaller, less threatening. "Remember me? From the mall?" Luca nodded slowly, not moving from his spot. "You spilled your coffee." A surprised laugh burst out of Leo. Yeah, I did. You kinda ran into me." "I was being a T-Rex," Luca explained solemnly. "They don't look where they're going." "That makes perfect sense," Leo said, smiling. The ice wasn't broken, but a tiny crack had appeared. He held up the bag. I brought something. Since we met in the toy store. Thought maybe we could build something." Luca's curiosity overcame his shyness. He took a few cautious steps forward. Leo sat on the floor, cross-legged, and carefully unpacked the expensive wooden train set. The smooth, polished pieces gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Luca knelt opposite him, watching intently as Leo fitted a few pieces of track together in a simple oval. For 20 minutes, they worked in near silence. Luca would hand Leo a piece of track. Leo would connect it. They built a simple layout. The only sounds were the soft *clack* of wood connecting and their breathing. The awkwardness was a physical presence in the room. Leo was terrified of saying the wrong thing, of moving too suddenly, of breaking the fragile spell. He was hyper-aware of the camera, of Ava watching from wherever she was. He felt like a specimen in a lab. Then, as Leo was fitting a bridge onto the track, Luca spoke, not looking up from the train car he was pushing. "Mama says you build real buildings." Leo's heart stopped. He looked at the boy. She said that." Luca nodded. "She said you draw them first, with lots of lines. Then they get built. Is that true?" The tight knot of anxiety in Leo's chest loosened, just a little. This was territory he knew. This was his language. "It's true," he said, his voice softening. "I try, anyway." He pulled out his phone, scrolled past his work emails, and opened a folder of conceptual sketches and models. Early designs, playful ideas, things that weren't bound by client budgets. He turned the screen to Luca. "See? These are just ideas. Sketches. These lines," he pointed, "show where the walls go. These little trees here, that's to imagine what it might look like with a garden." Luca's eyes went wide. He crawled around to sit beside Leo, their shoulders almost touching. He pointed a small finger at the screen. "What's that squiggly part?" "That's a staircase. It's a drawing to show how it twists." "Can a building be a circle?" "It can be any shape you can imagine, if you figure out how to make it stand up." For the next 20 minutes, Leo was in his element. He explained, in simple terms, about foundations holding up walls, about beams and loads. He showed Luca photos of construction sites, of cranes lifting giant I-beams into place. Luca asked question after question, his earlier shyness completely forgotten, utterly mesmerized by this secret world of lines and steel and creation. He wasn't seeing the picture man or a stranger. He was seeing a wizard who conjured castles from a pencil. In a dimly lit security room 1 floor below, Ava sat alone before a bank of monitors. The main screen showed the playroom in high definition. She watched, unmoving, as Leo patiently answered their son's endless questions. She saw the way Luca leaned into him, the way Leo's gestures became more animated as he talked about his work. She saw the genuine awe on her son's face. Her hand had risen to her mouth, fingers pressed against her lips as if to hold in a sound or a feeling. The hard lines around her eyes softened. For a moment, she wasn't the boss. She was just a mother, watching a piece of her child's world click into a place she'd never been able to fill. A single, silent tear escaped, tracing the same path as the one in the Galleria window. She didn't brush it away. The visits became a weekly ritual, the anchor in Leo's otherwise crumbling existence. The sterile playroom slowly transformed. Silvio, under strict orders, began allowing small additions: a large roll of butcher paper taped to one wall, a bucket of high-quality colored pencils. Leo and Luca's silent train building evolved into elaborate, sprawling cities drawn on paper. They designed skyscrapers with dinosaur-shaped gargoyles and bridges strong enough to hold 100 trains. Leo taught Luca the words for things: foundation, facade, cantilever. Luca, in turn, gave Leo a crash course in paleontology, explaining with deadly seriousness the difference between a brachiosaurus and a diplodocus, his small hands gesturing to show the neck lengths. Silvio's stern vigilance gradually thawed into a sort of bored, paternal amusement. He'd sometimes even offer a grunt of approval at a particularly impressive drawn bridge. He no longer looked at Leo as a threat, but as a peculiar, persistent fixture, like a tutor or a very dedicated entertainer. While this fragile new world was being built in a beige room, Ava's other world continued to spin on its axis of power and peril. We saw her in meetings, her presence cutting through boardrooms and backrooms alike. She was negotiating a shipping contract with a Greek magnate, her voice cold steel, her eyes missing nothing. But there was a new distraction. In the middle of a sentence about tariff codes, her gaze would drift to the framed photo on her desk, not a business award, but a picture of Luca, laughing, taken at a park. Her sharpest advisor, an old man named Victor with eyes like river stones and a mind like a vault, noticed. The boy asks about him. Victor murmured in Italian as they walked through the underground garage after a meeting. He is curious. It's being managed, Ava replied, her tone dismissing the subject. Curiosity is a vulnerability. The architect, he is a loose thread. He can be pulled, and the whole tapestry could unravel. Victor's voice was gentle but insistent, the voice that had guided her father. He is a point of entry, Ava. For our enemies, for the authorities. Sentiment is a luxury our position cannot afford. Ava stopped, turning to face him. The garage was cold, the air smelling of concrete and exhaust. Her eyes, in the dim light, were not those of a daughter seeking advice, but of the Don. He is Luca's father, Victor, she said, her voice quiet but absolute. That makes him family. And we protect family. That is the first rule. The oldest rule. Has that changed? Victor held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a slow, conceding nod. No, *Carpo star. It has not. The old rules, the bedrock of their world, had been reasserted. Not for Leo, but for the blood he shared with the heir. The enemy, as Victor predicted, did not miss the shift. Alessandro Costello was a new breed, young, hungry, educated in business schools but with the soul of a jackal. He saw the Moretti Empire as a legacy operation, ripe for takeover. He heard whispers of Ava's diverted attention, of an outsider being allowed near the heir. He saw not a family, but a fracture line. The first message was crude, but effective. Leo found it one Tuesday evening after a long day at his actual, paying job. His car, parked on the street outside his apartment building, had its driver's side window smashed to glittering crumbs. Spray painted in angry red across the hood was, ***, stay in your lane. Architect. ***, tucked under the wiper blade was a photograph. It was him, leaving the Riverbend Community Center 2 days prior, his tool bag slung over his shoulder. The angle was surveillant, professional. A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air seeped into Leo's bones. This wasn't random vandalism. This was a targeted warning. And they knew about the community center, the one place he'd thought was his own, separate from her. He didn't go home. He drove straight to the corporate building, his hands tight on the wheel. He didn't have an appointment, but Silvio, seeing his face, let him up to the secure floor where Ava was working late. He didn't go to the playroom. He was directed to a real office, smaller than her penthouse study but no less imposing. He walked in without knocking, the photograph held out in front of him like a piece of evidence. Ava was at her desk, glasses perched on her nose, reviewing a contract. She looked up, annoyance flashing in her eyes at the interruption. Then she saw the photo in his hand. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "This is what you deal with." Leo's voice was tight, but not with fear. It was with a hot, simmering anger. "They smashed my window. They spray-painted my car. They're watching me. They know about the community center." Ava took the photo. She studied it, her expression turning to granite. But the fury he saw wasn't directed at him. It was a cold, focused rage that seemed to drop the temperature in the room. She wasn't angry that he was involved. She was incensed that someone had dared. Costello, she breathed, the name a curse. She looked from the photo to Leo. His testing boundaries. Sending a message. Well, I got it. Leo snapped. Loud and clear. What am I supposed to do, Ava? Just accept that my life gets vandalized because I'm spending an hour a week with my son. No, she said, standing up. The word was final. You are not supposed to accept anything. She came around the desk, stopping close to him. Her gaze was fierce, possessive. He touched what is *mind star. He made it personal. The inclusion was unambiguous. He was no longer just Luca's father. He was under her protection. Her domain. You will not go home tonight. You will stay here. There are secure apartments in this building. Luca is already here with Rosa. He will be safe. I will handle this. It was an order. The old Leo would have bristled, would have seen it as control, as another cage. The new Leo saw it for what it was, the mobilization of a fortress. She was going to war because someone had thrown a stone at her gates. But instead of simply accepting his safe room fate, he did something that surprised even himself. How? He asked. She blinked. What? How will you handle it? With men and guns. That's what he expects. That's the old language. Her eyes narrowed. It is a language he understands. There are other languages, Leo said, our idea forming, born of his weeks of research, of seeing the blueprints of her empire and her enemies. Let me see it. See what? Whatever he's challenging you on. The port contract, right? The one the news has been hinting at. Let me see the schematics, the bids, the financials. Ava stared at him as if he'd spoken in ancient Greek. Why? Because I see patterns in structures. In buildings, in organizations. You said it yourself at the club. I'm persistent. I'm also thorough. You want to hurt him. Find me a weakness that isn't a body. Something that will cost him more than a few soldiers. Something that will ruin him in the light of day. The silence stretched. She was weighing him, measuring the man in front of her against the one who had run. Finally, with a slow, deliberate movement, she went back to her desk and pulled up a file on her large monitor. It was the complete proposal for the port modernization contract, a multi-billion-dollar public-private partnership. She turned the screen toward him. His undercut my bid by 15%. His bought 2 of the planning committee members. His construction subsidiary is poised to win. If he gets this foothold in the port, his legitimacy skyrockets. My influence wanes. Leo leaned over the desk, his architect's mind clicking into gear, pushing aside fear, pushing aside everything but the problem in front of him. He scanned the dense financial projections, the environmental impact reports, the zoning maps. He asked questions, sharp, technical ones. Ava answered, her own expertise meeting his. It was no longer a victim reporting a crime, it was a strategy session. For an hour, they worked. Then Leo's finger stopped on a map. This expansion zone here. The wetlands reclamation area. His proposal shows him filling it, building warehouses. But this satellite overlay, he zoomed in. That's not just marsh. There's a specific, protected brackish ecosystem here. A state-level environmental regulation from 2 years ago specifically prohibits heavy construction on this soil type without a prohibitively expensive mitigation process. He pulled up the regulatory code on another screen, cross-referencing. His environmental impact study glosses over it. He's either ignorant, which I doubt, or he's bribed the initial surveyors. If this came to light not through a rival, but through a concerned citizen's report to the State Environmental Board, his entire bid would be invalidated. He'd face massive fines. The scandal would taint him for years. It would cost him 10 times what he'd make on the contract. He looked up at her. Ava was watching him, not the screen. A spark was in her eyes, a familiar gleam he hadn't seen in years, the look of admiration she'd had when he'd explained a complex design, the look of seeing a partner who could match her step for step. You use the law, she said slowly, a smile touching her lips, a real one, sharp and approving. You bring it into the light. It costs him more than a gunfight. He's playing chess with checkers, Leo said. You have to play a different game. You're different, she murmured, the words escaping almost as if against her will. He met her gaze, the glow of the monitor reflecting in both their eyes. The air between them was charged, alive with the intensity of their shared focus, with the ghosts of the past and the terrifying possibility of a future. I had to be, he said, his voice low, to ever hope of looking you in the eye again. Their hands were both resting on the desk, near the keyboard. As he spoke, his pinky finger brushed against hers. It was the smallest of contacts, a whisper of skin on skin, but it sent a jolt through both of them, a static shock of memory and potential. The air crackled. Her breath caught. His did the same. For a suspended moment, the port, Costello, the threats, all of it fell away. There was just the desk, the dim light, and the electric space between their touching hands. The door burst open, shattering the moment. Marco stood there, his usual composure fractured. Boss. It's Costello. He didn't wait for a reply. His men hit the Southside warehouse. They took Ignacio. All the warmth, all the connection, vanished from Ava's face, replaced by an Arctic cold. Ignacio wasn't just a bookkeeper. He was in his 70s, had served her father, was a living archive of their history. This was an escalation. This was a declaration of war. Get the cars, she said, her voice deathly quiet. She was already moving, grabbing a coat from a hook. We go now. Leo, she commanded without looking at him. You will stay here with Luca and Rosa. Silvio will secure the floor. But Leo was already standing, moving around the desk. The fear was there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was drowned out by a louder, more insistent voice. He had just helped plan a counterstrike. He had just looked his fear in the eye and named it. He was not going to be relegated to the nursery now. Like hell I will, he said. Ava stopped, turning to stare at him, her eyes flashing with fury and disbelief. This is not a negotiation. This is not your world. Ignacio is family, right? Leo shot back, throwing her own words at her. You protect family. His part of yours. And I'm not staying behind while you walk into something because of me. He took a step toward her, his own resolve hardening. I may not know how to fire a gun, but I can drive a car. I can create a distraction. I can think star. You just saw me do it. Don't bench me now because the game got rough. Marco looked between them, awaiting his orders. The tension in the room was a live wire. Ava's gaze locked with Leo's. She saw the man who had dissected a rival's empire with a zoning code. She saw the father who had patiently taught her son about cantilevers. She saw the husband who had once been her partner. And she saw the fierce, stubborn determination in his eyes that mirrored her own. He wasn't the man who ran anymore. A million calculations ran through her mind in a second. Logistics. Risk. Advantage. Fine, she snapped, the word a concession and a command. You come. You do exactly what Marco or I tell you. You do not get out of the car unless I say. You are a tool, not a soldier. Understood. Understood, Leo said, his heart hammering against his ribs. Marco, get him a vest. She strode past him toward the door. We leave in 90 seconds. As Leo followed, shrugging into the heavy, unfamiliar Kevlar vest Marco handed him, he knew he was crossing a line from which there was no return. He was no longer dancing at the edges of her world. He was charging headlong into its dark, violent heart. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the darkness. He was afraid of failing the woman leading him into it. The convoy to the Southside warehouse was a silent, speeding spear through the city's night veins. Leo rode in the middle car with Ava and Marco. The Kevlar vest was heavy and awkward, smelling of stale sweat and polymer. He felt like a child playing soldier, but the grim set of Ava's jaw and the cold efficiency with which Marco checked the weapon holstered under his arm made the game lethally real. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, each block taking them further from the world of zoning codes and into a realm of raw, ugly power. You will stay in the car, Ava said, not looking at him, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Marco will stay with you. You do not get out. You do not speak. You are a shadow. I told you, I can help, Leo insisted, his voice tight. Your help was the environmental report. That is tomorrow's weapon. Tonight is about muscle and message. Your presence is the message enough. She finally glanced at him, her eyes glowing in the dark interior. That you are here, with me, is a declaration. That is all you need to do. Understood? He nodded, swallowing hard. He was a prop. A symbol. It was infuriating and terrifying. The warehouse district was a skeletal graveyard of the city's industrial past. The target was a vast, decaying brick structure that had once housed a textile mill. Rusted fire escapes clung to its sides like iron ivy. Costello's men had chosen well, it was isolated, echoing, and filled with shadows. Their 3-car convoy slid to a halt a block away, engines cutting to a whisper. Ava's men, 8 of them, including Silvio who had met them there, fanned out with silent, practiced precision. They were ghosts in the darkness. Ava turned to Leo one last time. Stay. It was a command, and a plea. Then she was gone, slipping from the car with Marco, melting into the night toward the warehouse's side door. Leo was left in the silent car with the driver, a young man who kept his eyes forward, hands on the wheel. The wait was agony. Every second stretched into an eternity. He could hear nothing but his own pounding heart and the distant drip of a broken gutter. He imagined scenes of violence, of gunfire erupting in the cavernous space, of Ava falling. He couldn't do it. He couldn't sit here. He wasn't a soldier, but he wasn't a piece of furniture either. He had gotten her into this. His hands, slick with sweat, found the door handle. Sir, you can't, the driver began, but Leo was already pushing the door open, the dome light thankfully disabled. He slipped out into the cold, damp air. I'm not going in. I'm just getting a view, he hissed, and before the driver could protest further, Leo moved along the wall of a neighboring building, using the deep shadows for cover. He found a vantage point behind a stack of rotting pallets, with a clear line of sight through a grimy, broken window into the warehouse's main floor. The scene inside was a tableau of tension under the sickly yellow glow of a few hanging work lamps. Costello's men, maybe a dozen, were loosely clustered. In the center, Alessandro Costello stood, young, sleek in an expensive overcoat, a smirk playing on his lips. Before him, tied to a chair, was an elderly man, Ignacio. His face was bruised, his white shirt torn, but he held his head high, his eyes defiant. And facing them, outnumbered but radiating an aura of absolute authority, was Ava. Marco and Silvio flanked her, their postures coiled springs. The air in the vast space seemed too thick to breathe. Moretti, Costello's voice echoed mockingly. You came yourself. I'm touched. And you even brought a little extra, wait. His eyes flickered past her, and for a horrible second, Leo thought he'd been seen. But Costello was looking at her men, trying to make up for quality with quantity. Ignacio is an old man, Alessandro. Ava's voice cut through the space, calm and sharp as a scalpel. This is beneath even you. Let him go, and we can discuss your pathetic bid for the port like adults. Adults? Costello laughed. We're not having a board meeting, Ava. We're having a conversation about respect. You've been distracted. Playing house. It makes you look weak. And in our business, weakness is an invitation. He took a step toward Ignacio. I just came to collect the RSVP. Leo's mind, frozen with fear, began to work. He wasn't looking at the people. He was looking at the asterisk space star. His architects I automatically scanned the structure. High, timber trussed ceiling. Brick walls with rows of old, grime-caked windows. A network of steel I-beams added later for support, crisscrossing the space. His gaze caught on one joint where a vertical beam met a horizontal one. The steel was dark with more than dirt. It was corroded, a deep, flaking orange-brown. A memory sparked, a city planning meeting months ago about historical industrial buildings. This very warehouse had been flagged for a safety review due to fraudulent renovation permits. The contractor had used substandard, untreated steel for reinforcements. He looked at Costello's men. They weren't all hardened killers. Some looked young, nervous. One in particular, a man in a leather jacket standing near Costello's right-hand man, kept glancing at the exits, his Adam's apple bobbing. A plan, insane and desperate, formed in Leo's mind. It wasn't about guns. It was about physics. And fear. He didn't think. He moved. He stepped out from behind the pallets and walked toward the main warehouse door, his footsteps loud in the quiet night. Every head inside swiveled toward him as he pushed the heavy metal door open with a screech of rusted hinges. Ava's head snapped around. He saw pure, unadulterated fury and terror in her eyes. Asterisk, what are you doing? Asterisk, Marco and Silvio tensed, their hands moving toward their weapons. Costello stared, then burst out laughing. Oh, this is precious. You brought your ex-husband. The asterisk architect asterisk. Is he here to design you a nicer prison cell, Ava? His men chuckled, the tension breaking into cruel amusement. Leo ignored them. He ignored Ava's searing gaze. He walked forward, not toward Ava, but slightly to the side, putting himself in the space between the two factions. His eyes were locked not on Costello, but on the nervous man in the leather jacket. You're Luigi, right? Leo said, his voice surprisingly steady, carrying in the hollow space. Luigi Conti. You filed the building permits for this renovation. The ones that claimed galvanized steel beam reinforcements. The man, Luigi, jumped, his eyes widening. Who the hell are you? I'm the guy who reads public records, Leo said, taking another step. He pointed upward, his finger aiming at the corroded joint. That's not galvanized steel. That's cheap, untreated crap. It's been rusting from the inside out for 2 years. The weight load calculations on your permits are fantasy. He turned his gaze to Costello, but spoke to the room, to all the men. You know what happens when a rust-compromised I-beam under load fails. It doesn't just break. It asterisk explodes star. It sends shrapnel through everything and everyone in a 50-foot radius. And this whole ceiling, he swept his arm in an arc, is held up by a dozen more just like it. He had turned the chessboard. This was no longer a mob standoff. It was a workplace safety nightmare. He saw the doubt flicker in the eyes of Costello's men. They understood bullets. They didn't understand structural failure. It was an invisible, indiscriminate threat. You're bluffing, Costello snarled, but his smirk was gone. Am I? Leo pulled out his phone, thumbing it with feigned calm. The city's building inspection database is public. The red flag notice for this address is right here. All it takes is one anonymous call from me to the fire marshal right now, and this place is swarmed by city officials, news crews. They'll find the fake permits, the shoddy work. They'll find you, Luigi. And they'll find the person who paid you. He looked directly at Costello. This isn't a war. It's a liability. And you're all standing under it. The psychological shift was palpable. The men weren't looking at Ava's outnumbered crew anymore. They were glancing nervously at the ceiling, at the dark, flaking steel above them. They were thinking about prison, about ruin, about being crushed by a ton of collapsing brick and iron. It was a fear more profound than a gunfight. Ava saw it. She moved with the lethal grace of a predator seizing an opening. Leave Ignacio, she said, her voice a whipcrack in the silence. Walk out of here. Now. Or my consigliere here files that report with the city in 5 minutes, and you can explain to the firefighters what you're doing in a condemned building with a hostage. She called him her consigliere. The title hung in the dusty air, more powerful than any weapon. It wasn't just an advisor. It was a position of supreme trust, of family. It meant he spoke with her authority. It meant he was asterisk in star. Costello's face contorted with rage. He was beaten, not by force, but by leverage. He gestured violently at his men. Cut him loose. As one of his men hurried to untie Ignacio, Costello pointed a trembling finger at Ava, then at Leo. This isn't over. You've made a grave mistake, bringing a civilian into this. He's not a civilian, Ava said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper only the front ranks could hear. He's mine. And you've just declared war on my family. We do things differently now. They backed out of the warehouse, Leo helping a wobbly but proud Ignacio, supported by Marco. Not a shot fired. The battle was won with a rusted beam and a building code. Back in the penthouse, the atmosphere was different. They weren't in her office, the room of business. They were in the living room, a space of leather sofas and soft lamps. Ignacio was being tended to by a discreet doctor in another room. Rosa had put a blissfully unaware Luca to bed. The adrenaline that had sustained Leo drained away, leaving him hollow and trembling. He sat on a sofa, his hands shaking so badly he had to clasp them between his knees. Ava stood by the window, her back to him, her shoulders rigid. The silence was heavy, full of everything that had just happened. "I was so scared," Leo said, the words breaking the quiet. He wasn't talking about Costello or the guns. Not of them. Of failing you. Again. Of doing something stupid that got you hurt. Ava didn't turn. "You weren't supposed to be there." "I know. But I couldn't just wait. Not again." She turned then. The iron control, the mask of the boss, was gone. Her face was pale, etched with fatigue and an emotion so raw it made Leo's heart clench. Tears, which she never allowed, welled in her eyes, spilling over and tracing paths through the dust still smudged on her cheek from the warehouse. "You left because I was too much," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Because my world was too big, too dark, too dangerous for you. You said you couldn't breathe. And then you came back, and you stood beside me. In a warehouse, facing down a man who would have killed you for sport. You called my bluff, Leo. You looked at him and you made my threat *real star. You weren't just standing there. You were * me." The dam broke. A sob escaped her, and she covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. It was the collapse of 5 years of lonely fortitude, of having to be the unbreakable one for everyone. For her family, her men, her son. Leo was across the room in an instant. He didn't hesitate. He pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, her fists clutching the fabric of his shirt, her tears hot against his neck. He held her, really held her, for the first time since he'd left. He whispered into her hair, nonsense words, apologies, promises. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Ava. I was wrong. I was a coward. I'm here. I'm not leaving." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her face ravaged and beautiful. And then she kissed him. It wasn't like the kisses of their past, fueled by passion or young love. This was desperate. This was healing. This was an ocean of apologies, of grief, of pent-up love and searing need, all poured into a single, perfect point of contact. It was a homecoming to a place he'd thought was lost forever. It tasted of salt and dust and hope. The next morning, the reality of their new world descended. Victor was waiting in her office, his old face a mask of displeasure. "That was a reckless display of sentiment, Ava. You paraded him in front of Costello. He is a liability squared now. A target painted on his back to get to you and the boy." Ava, dressed again in the armor of a suit, listened impassively. Then she stood. "Call a meeting. The inner circle. Now." An hour later, the penthouse's formal dining room, usually silent, was filled with her 12 most senior captains and advisors. Victor, Marco, Silvio, men who had known her father. The air was thick with curiosity and tension. Leo stood beside her chair, feeling every eye on him, assessing, doubting. Ava didn't sit. She looked at each man in turn. Last night, Alessandro Costello took Ignacio. He declared war on this family. He was met not just with force, but with strategy. He was defeated not by a bullet, but by the law. She placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. The gesture was possessive, definitive. "This is Leo. He is Luca's father. He is my consigliere. He is under my protection. He is part of this family. Harm to him is harm to me. Harm to my son. You know the penalty for that." The room was stone silent. No one moved. Then, slowly, Marco gave a single, firm nod. Silvio followed. One by one, around the table, the men acknowledged the decree. It was not a welcome, it was an acceptance of a new fact. The family had been officially, irrevocably recognized. Later, in the quiet of her private study, she offered him the choice one final time. The sun was setting, painting the room in gold. "You can still go," she said, leaning against her desk, watching him. "This life, it's yours now, if you choose it. But you saw what it is. The threat is real. Costello is just the first. There is no going back to being just an architect. But..." She took a breath, her vulnerability showing again. "You can choose the other path, too. Safety. For you. I would understand." Leo looked at her, the most powerful, dangerous, beautiful woman he had ever known, offering him an escape from the very thing that made her who she was. He thought of Luca's laughter. He thought of the warehouse, of standing beside her, of being asterisk with asterisk her. He thought of a life of beige safety and quiet despair. He crossed the room and took her hand. He lifted it and placed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart, which was beating steadily, surely, for her. "The safest place I've ever been," he said, his voice thick with certainty, "was in the eye of your storm. I'm not leaving again." He was choosing the storm. He was choosing her. And for the first time in 5 years, he was exactly where he belonged. 6 months was a lifetime in the right hands. Leo's hands, which once sketched sterile towers for indifferent clients, now drafted the future of entire city blocks. His office wasn't in a construction trailer or a bland corporate park. It occupied the top floor of an elegantly restored Art Deco building in the very neighborhood he was helping to revitalize. The placard on the door was simple, modern, and spoke volumes. *** Moretti and Collins Development ***. It was a statement of partnership, of union, of a new kind of empire. His space was a blend of their two worlds. Architectural models and blueprints shared desk space with secure, encrypted monitors. His staff was a mix of brilliant, idealistic young architects and a few of Ava's more business-savvy, discreet associates who understood the nuances of capital and city politics. They were winning contracts, not through intimidation, but through innovation. Their proposal for the Riverbend expansion, which included affordable housing units, a new community center wing, and green spaces, had beaten out 3 major national firms. They were gentrifying, but on their terms, with community land trusts, local hiring quotas, and a respect for history that was more than just preserving facades. Leo was the public face, the charismatic visionary with a compelling backstory of returning to his roots. The capital and the formidable political machinery behind him remained, as always, a gracefully silent partner. One evening, the penthouse felt less like a fortress and more like a home. The smells were of garlic and rosemary from Rosa's kitchen, not lemon verbena and tension. They were at the dining table, but it wasn't a strategy session. Luca, now a confident, chattering 5-year-old, was recounting his day with breathless detail, his hands waving as he described a bug he'd found at the park. And then it flew Papa. Right onto Marco's head. And Marco didn't even move. He dissolved into giggles. Leo smiled, wiping sauce from the boy's chin. Maybe Marco thought it was a new hat. A bug hat. Luca shrieked with delight. Ava watched them, a soft, unguarded smile on her lips. She was in comfortable cashmere, not a power suit. When Luca's story wound down, she turned to Leo, her tone shifting seamlessly from mother to partner. The final signatures on the waterfront deal came through this afternoon. The city accepted our revised plans, with the corrected load-bearing specs. They're fast-tracking it. That's the environmental mitigation budget secured, then, Leo said, cutting a piece of chicken. We can break ground on the Riverbend Community Housing Phase 2 next month. The foundation work for the South Wing. We should use the firm from Queens. Their union rates are better, and their safety record is impeccable. Have Marco send the particulars to Victor for vetting, Ava nodded, taking a sip of wine. It was a discussion about mergers and acquisitions, about millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs, conducted over pasta and a child's laughter. It was domestic and powerful, intimate and vast, all at once. In the background, the large television was muted, tuned to the evening news. A familiar face flashed on the screen, Alessandro Costello, but not the smug, sleek predator from the warehouse. This man was harried, his hair disheveled, his expensive coat rumpled as he was led through a gauntlet of flashing cameras, his hands cuffed behind his back. The Chiron scrolled below, prominent businessman arrested on multiple counts of fraud, bribery, and building code violations. Investigation triggered by anonymous tip to state authorities, Leo and Ava both glanced at the screen. No words were exchanged. No triumphant smirks. Just a moment of shared, quiet recognition. A look that said, that chapter is closed. She reached under the table and found his hand, giving it a single, firm squeeze. He squeezed back. Justice, of a sort, had been served in the light of day, using the very weapons Leo had suggested. The rival wasn't dead, he was erased, rendered impotent by scandal and the law. It was their new way. Cleaner. More permanent. Later, with Luca safely asleep, dreaming of bugs and dinosaurs, they stood on the sprawling penthouse terrace. The city lay at their feet, a glittering, breathing organism. The cacophony of sirens and traffic was a distant hum up here, a white noise that spoke of life and chaos and possibility. The air was cool, sharp, scented with the coming autumn. Ava leaned against the railing, looking out, not as a queen surveying her domain, but as a woman contemplating the sheer scale of the life she'd built. "I don't want another wedding," she said, her voice quiet but clear in the vastness. "No ceremony, no dress, no priests, or paperwork that doesn't matter." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the city's lights. "I want this. Every single day of it. The trust. Waking up and knowing you're here. The partnership. Making decisions with you, for us, for Luca, for all of it. That's the vow. That's the promise. Not words said once in a church." Leo understood. A wedding would be a performance, a piece of theater for their respective worlds. What they had built in the last 6 months, in the boardrooms, on the job sites, at this dinner table, was the real sacrament. It was lived. It was earned. "The family," he said, agreeing. He reached into the pocket of his jacket, which was slung over a nearby chair. He pulled out a small, worn leather box, not a jeweller's velvet case. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded silk, wasn't a diamond ring. It was a pendant. A simple, elegant teardrop of smoky quartz set in white gold, hanging from a broken chain. Ava's breath caught. She recognized it instantly. It was the necklace he'd given her for their first anniversary. The one she'd torn from her neck in a fury during their final, catastrophic fight and thrown at him as he walked out the door. She'd never seen it again. She'd assumed he'd thrown it away. "You kept it," she whispered, her voice thick. "I never could get rid of it," he said, his own voice rough. "It felt like throwing away the last true piece of us. Even when I hated myself, even when I was trying to forget, I couldn't let this go." He took it out of the box. The broken chain dangled, a silver scar. "I'm not giving this back to you. I'm not asking you to wear it again as if nothing happened." He held it between them, the quartz catching a stray beam of light from the living room. "I'm asking you to share it with me. To let me help you carry its weight. The weight of what we broke, and what we're building. It's not a restart. It's a continuation. On a new foundation." It was a proposal, but not for a marriage. It was a proposal for a permanent alliance. Foreshouldering the past, together, as they built the future. Tears, those rare and precious things, filled Ava's eyes again. But these were not tears of pain or fury. They were tears of a profound, hard-won acceptance. She reached out, not for the pendant, but for his hand that held it. She closed her fingers around his fist, the cool quartz pressed between their palms. "Yes," she said, the single word holding the weight of forgiveness, of promise, of a love that had been to hell and back and had chosen to build its heaven right here, in the midst of the beautiful, dangerous storm. "I'll share it with you." She didn't take the pendant to put it on. She left it in his hand, her hand over his. Then she leaned in and kissed him, a kiss of sealing, of partnership, of a bond now tempered stronger than any steel beam. The final image was them, standing together at the railing, silhouetted against the infinite glittering tapestry of the city. Their joined hands, clasped around the old pendant, a relic of love and loss, rested on the cold metal between them. They were no longer a man and a mafia boss. They were partners. Consiglieri to each other. Parents. Architects of a new world. The camera held on their linked hands, the city's lights blurring into a river of gold behind them. Then it slowly pulled back, wider and wider, until their two figures became small, steadfast points of light within the vast, sleeping metropolis. A city that was now, in its own way, a little safer, a little more just, a little more whole, under their united, watchful care. *** final voiceover, Leo, calm, sure, at peace ***. I spent 2 years believing I had to escape her world to find myself. I thought her love was a gilded cage, and my fear was the key to freedom. I was wrong. I had to stop running. I had to turn around and walk back in. Not as a prisoner this time, but as a partner. I had to enter the storm fully, stand in the very eye of it, to understand it was where I was meant to be all along. Our love wasn't the cage. It was the blueprint. And this time, we're building it to last.